Hey there, welcome to Brad Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. I'm a 29-year-old woman, and my partner is 23. We were visiting her hometown, a tiny place nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains, isolated from the modern world by miles of dense forest. The town itself feels frozen in time, with its single main street and buildings that haven't changed in decades. During our visit, my partner wanted to meet up with Nathan, an old friend from high school who still lived in the area. We agreed to meet at a secluded beach by the lake, a spot that locals frequently used during summer months. From the moment we arrived, something felt off about Nathan. He immediately started making inappropriate comments, suggesting things that made both of us uncomfortable. His jokes weren't really jokes. They were thinly veiled propositions, each one more explicit than the last. The way he looked at us made my skin crawl, his eyes holding something predatory behind their seemingly casual glance. My partner and I kept exchanging worried looks. She whispered to me that he'd never acted like this before, that something was different about him. He made an excuse about wanting to get dinner at a local bar, hoping to escape the increasingly uncomfortable situation. Instead of taking the hint, Nathan asked to join us. The situation felt too awkward to refuse, so we reluctantly agreed. He followed our car to the bar, claiming he wasn't sure of the route despite having lived in the area his entire life. At the bar, we ordered drinks and food, then moved to the patio. For a while, Nathan seemed to calm down, acting more like a normal person. Halfway through my first drink, an unusual tiredness began creeping over me. It didn't make sense, we'd had a long day, but this felt different, more chemical than natural exhaustion. My partner gave me the signal that she wanted to leave. We made excuses about needing to check on her grandfather, but Nathan kept pushing us to come to his house, promising good weed and to introduce us to his cats. We finally managed to get to our car, parked next to his. Just as we were about to leave, he signaled for us to roll down the window, claiming his GPS wasn't working and asking if we could lead him to the main road. As we drove, we noticed he stayed behind us long after he should have turned off toward his own destination. Suddenly, he pulled up beside us on the two-lane road, waving what was clearly my partner's phone in his window. We pulled over, and he returned the phone quickly before hurrying away. That's when the pieces started falling into place. We knew for certain my partner had put her phone in her fanny pack, which had been on the table with our other belongings. There was no way she had left it behind. We'd seen her pack it up. For Nathan to have the phone, he must have taken it while we were still at the bar, while saying goodbye and walking to our cars together. My partner later revealed that she'd tasted something bitter in her drink and had been suspicious of Nathan's behavior. This explained why she wanted to leave the bar and stay in public where she felt safer. When he approached the car to return the phone, she deliberately showed him the knife she kept for protection, something I hadn't noticed at the time. His reaction to seeing the knife was telling. Instead of expressing confusion or asking why she would flash a weapon at an old friend, he immediately left. His quick departure suggested he understood exactly what she was communicating, that she recognized a threat and was prepared to defend herself. The implications are chilling. He likely stole the phone to force us to pull over on a dark, isolated road. The bitter taste in our drinks suggests they might have been tampered with. The fact that he fled when confronted with potential resistance indicates he had malicious intentions. Several things remain unexplained. How did he manage to take the phone without either of us noticing? How did he possibly spike our drinks unless he had help from the bartender? Yet we had chosen the bar, not him. The whole situation feels like a narrowly avoided tragedy. This experience has changed how we approach meeting old friends and acquaintances. We're more cautious now, more aware of how quickly familiar faces can become threatening. The incident reminded us that danger often wears a friendly face, and that trust, once broken, leaves you questioning every interaction. The small-town facade of safety shattered that night, revealing the darker currents that can run beneath seemingly peaceful surfaces. We never reported the incident. In a town that small, accusations can have far-reaching consequences. But we made sure other friends in the area knew to be careful around Nathan. Sometimes the most dangerous situations aren't the obviously threatening ones, but those that start with a friendly smile and an invitation to reminisce about old times. We were lucky. Our instincts kicked in before anything worse could happen. But the experience left us with a deeper appreciation for trusting our gut feelings and recognizing that sometimes people we think we know can become strangers wearing familiar faces. I'm sharing this story hoping it might help someone else stay safe. This happened several years ago when I was working as a wildlife photographer in Colorado. I had spent the whole day tracking mountain goats near an abandoned ski resort in the Rockies, trying to capture their migration patterns. As dusk approached, I decided to stay at the resort's empty parking lot to review my photos and maybe catch some night shots of the local wildlife. The old resort had been closed for years, its weathered buildings standing like ghosts against the darkening sky. The parking lot was vast and empty, bordered by dense pine forest on three sides. Around 8 in the evening, exhaustion from the day's hiking caught up with me. I reclined my seat in my old Land Rover, thinking I'd rest my eyes for just a moment. The gentle patter of light rain against the windshield soon lulled me to sleep. I don't know how long I was out, but I woke to a gentle tapping on my window. My neck was stiff from the awkward position, and a thick fog had rolled in, creating an eerie atmosphere around the vehicle. As I turned toward the sound, I saw a young woman standing beside my driver's side door. She was desperately tapping at the window, her face a mask of distress. Something about her appearance struck me as odd. She wore a pristine white sweater and dark jeans, looking more suited for a casual dinner than being stranded in the mountains. I lowered the window slightly, and she immediately launched into her story, speaking in quick, panicked bursts. "Please, you have to help me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I was hiking with my friend, and we got separated. I've been walking for hours, and my phone's dead. Could you please let me in? I'm freezing out here." For a split second, I almost reached for the door lock. After all, I'd want someone to help if I was in trouble. But something made me hesitate. Her story didn't add up. Despite claiming to be lost in the woods for hours, there wasn't a single smudge on her white sweater. Her makeup was flawless, not a hair out of place, and though she claimed to be freezing, I couldn't see her breath in the cold mountain air. I glanced around, using my photographer's eye to scan the surroundings. The fog had thickened, but my trained eye caught something through the mist, the slightest movement behind my vehicle. I adjusted my rearview mirror and felt my blood run cold. 3 figures were crouched behind my Land Rover, positioned like sprinters at the starting block. The woman must have noticed my change in expression, because she quickly glanced back at her companions. In that instant, her desperate facade cracked, replaced by something much colder. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I started the engine, throwing the vehicle into reverse first to startle the men behind me, then shifted into drive and floored it. The powerful engine roared as I sped out of the parking lot, the wheels spinning on the wet pavement. I caught a glimpse of the woman diving out of the way in my side mirror, her previously distressed expression replaced with pure rage. The 3 men emerged from behind my vehicle, but I was already gone, gravel spraying from my tires as I hit the access road. When I finally reached the main highway, I checked the time, 2:15 in the morning. Looking back, I realize how differently things could have gone if I hadn't noticed those little inconsistencies. These people knew what they were doing. They had chosen an isolated location, used a convincing decoy, and positioned themselves to take advantage of someone's natural instinct to help. These days, I'm much more cautious about where I park, especially during my night photography sessions. I stick to well-lit areas with security cameras, and I'm always aware of my surroundings. The one positive thing I take from that night is that the woman wasn't actually in danger. She was the danger. But it still haunts me to think about what might have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts. This happened during one of my late-night drives through the Scottish Highlands. I'm a long-haul truck driver, delivering supplies to the remote villages scattered across the northern parts of Scotland. The roads there are treacherous enough during the day, but at night they become something else entirely. It was late October, and I was hauling a load of medical supplies to a clinic in Inverness. The night had settled in early, as it tends to do that time of year, and a thick mist was rolling down from the mountains. My truck's headlights could barely cut through the darkness, creating strange shadows that danced along the winding road ahead. I'll admit I was going a bit faster than I should have been. The delivery was running late, and I wanted to make it through the pass before the weather worsened. The old diesel engine of my Volvo truck rumbled steadily as I navigated the sharp turns, its familiar sound somewhat comforting in the oppressive darkness. Then something happened that still sends chills down my spine. As I rounded a particularly nasty bend, my headlights caught a flash of crimson red. There, standing in the middle of the road, was a woman in a bright red dress. I slammed on the brakes, the truck's tires screaming against the wet asphalt as I swerved to avoid her. The heavy vehicle skidded, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought I was going to jackknife right there on the mountain road. When the truck finally came to a stop, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the idling engine. I pulled onto the shoulder, making sure my hazard lights were on, and climbed down from the cab. My legs were shaking as I walked back to where I'd seen the woman. What I found instead was a mannequin lying in the road. It was one of those old-fashioned display models, the kind you'd see in vintage clothing shops in Edinburgh. The red dress it wore was immaculate, despite lying on the wet road. At first, I felt relief, thank God, it wasn't a real person. Then anger set in. What kind of sick joke was this? Someone had deliberately placed it at the bend, knowing it could cause an accident. I picked up the mannequin, intending to throw it off the road, but something made me pause. In the beam of my flashlight, I noticed something odd about it. There was writing on its back, partially hidden by the dress. My curiosity got the better of me, and I moved the fabric aside to read it. The message was written in neat, careful handwriting. Margaret Rose MacDonald, born May 15, 1978. Primary school teacher. Portrait, below that was a date from 3 years ago, and then more writing that made my blood run cold. On this spot, my life was taken by a monster who still walks free. He forced me off the road and into the ravine. They never found my car. They never found me. But I'm still here, warning others. The message continued, becoming more frantic, the handwriting deteriorating into desperate scrawls. I see him sometimes, still driving these roads. He'll never be forgiven. Never be forgiven. Never be forgiven. The words repeated until they faded into illegible scratches. A gust of wind whipped around me, and I suddenly noticed how quiet everything had become. No birds, no insects, just the soft purr of my truck's engine and the whisper of wind through the heather. That's when I saw it, another vehicle parked further up the road, its outline barely visible in the mist. It looked abandoned, but something told me it wasn't. The feeling of being watched crept over me. Whether it was by the person who placed the mannequin there or by something else, I didn't want to find out. I hurried back to my truck, my boots crunching on the gravel. As I pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of the red dress in my side mirror, now just a crimson blur in the darkness. I avoided that stretch of road for nearly a year after that night. When I finally drove it again, in broad daylight, the mannequin was gone. But sometimes, on particularly misty nights, when I'm driving through the highlands, I find myself scanning the bends for a flash of red and wondering about Margaret Rose MacDonald and the story she left behind on that lonely mountain road. This happened just last month on one of Norway's remote mountain roads. As a rescue service worker, I've seen my fair share of strange situations, but this one still keeps me up at night. I was driving home after a long shift, monitoring avalanche risks in the mountains near Trollsteigen. The northern lights were dancing across the sky, casting an ethereal green glow over the snow-covered landscape. The weather report had warned of an approaching storm, and I could already see the first signs, dark clouds gathering over the distant peaks, threatening to swallow the aurora's light. It was around midnight when I rounded a bend and had to slam on my brakes. There, in the middle of the road, stood a woman with her arms outstretched in a universal stop gesture. She was blocking my path completely, leaving me no choice but to halt my Volvo XC70 rescue vehicle. The woman approached my car, gesturing for me to roll down my window. Given my profession, I'm usually the first to help someone in distress, but something felt off about this situation. Still, I lowered the window slightly, keeping my guard up. Her story came out in a rush. According to her, she'd been traveling with her boyfriend when they had a heated argument. He'd forced her out of the car and driven off, leaving her stranded. She claimed her phone was still in his car, along with her wallet and warm clothes. Her story was comprehensive, too comprehensive, as if she'd rehearsed every detail. My rescue worker instincts were battling with my gut feeling. I've helped countless stranded travelers over the years, but this felt different. Her clothes weren't nearly disheveled enough for someone who'd been walking in the mountain wind. Despite claiming to have been abandoned in the cold, she showed no signs of shivering. Her makeup was perfect, not smeared by tears or wind. She became increasingly insistent, her voice rising with a hint of aggression that seemed at odds with her supposed victim status. When she demanded my phone, alarm bells started ringing in my head. I had my work radio, but she specifically wanted my mobile phone, my only personal connection to the outside world. What really set me off was how she kept glancing toward the tree line while she was talking. It was subtle, but I've spent enough time in search and rescue to recognize signaling when I see it. Those quick, purposeful glances weren't the nervous looks of someone afraid of their angry boyfriend returning. They were communications with someone hiding in the darkness. I had already activated my dash cam's emergency recording feature, a habit from years of rescue work. When she started becoming more aggressive, I made my decision. I began slowly driving forward, honking my horn in long, clear blasts, our standard warning signal in the mountains. She threw herself onto my hood in what appeared to be desperation, but her movements were too controlled, too practiced. When I didn't stop, she rolled off with an agility that no truly distressed person would possess. In my rearview mirror, I watched as she calmly sat down in the middle of the road, seemingly waiting for the next vehicle. That was perhaps the most chilling part. Someone genuinely stranded would have been trying to walk toward the nearest town, especially with a storm approaching. I immediately radioed the incident to our command center and continued driving until I reached the next town. The next day, I reviewed the dash cam footage. The video confirmed everything I'd seen, but it also captured something I'd missed: dark figures moving in the tree line, visible only because of their movement against the snow. My girlfriend was furious when I told her about the incident. She said I was heartless for not helping a stranded woman. But after I showed her the footage, particularly the shadows moving in the trees, she understood. Sometimes what looks like someone in need of help is actually a carefully laid trap. I still drive that road regularly as part of my job. I've never seen that woman again, but I've heard reports from other drivers about similar incidents in the area. The local police are investigating, but so far they've found nothing concrete. Yet every time I pass that spot, especially during the winter nights when the northern lights paint the snow in ghostly colors, I watch the tree line carefully, wondering if those shadows are still waiting there, looking for their next target. My hobby is chasing the perfect shot of the aurora borealis, which often leads me to spend nights in remote locations. This particular incident happened at an abandoned weather station in northern Sweden, just above the Arctic Circle. These old stations are perfect for night photography. They're usually positioned on high ground with clear views of the sky, far from any light pollution. I found this location through an old photographer's forum, a decommissioned meteorological station that had been monitoring Arctic weather patterns since the 1950s until its closure 15 years ago. The station sat atop a lonely hill, its white dome barely visible against the perpetual darkness of the polar night. When I arrived, I noticed 2 long-haul trucks already parked in the station's small lot. Perfect, I thought. Their presence meant I wouldn't be completely alone out here. I parked my van away from the trucks, positioning it in the center of the lot where I had the best view of the sky. The station's abandoned buildings loomed behind me, their windows dark and empty. I spent some time checking my camera equipment and reviewing weather apps on my phone, waiting for the right conditions for aurora photography. As the evening wore on, exhaustion from the long drive began to set in. I reclined my seat, pulled my thermal sleeping bag over me, and drifted off to sleep. I woke to a strange sound, something like a small stone hitting the back of my van. Checking my phone, I saw it was just past 4 in the morning. When I looked in my rearview mirror, the lot appeared empty except for the trucks. I took a drink from my thermos and was about to go back to sleep when nature called. Stepping out into the bitter cold, I hoped the old station might have a working restroom, but the doors were all locked and covered in ice. As I was finding a discreet spot behind my van, I heard one of the truck doors open and close. Another person awake at this hour. When I returned to my van, a man was standing there, probably in his 40s, wearing a thick winter coat and glasses that had fogged up in the cold. "Couldn't sleep last night, could you?" he asked, his breath visible in the freezing air. "Were you too scared?" I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "Oh," he adjusted his glasses. "You didn't notice her then." The way he said it sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. He explained that he'd been watching a movie in his cab when I arrived. Around midnight, he noticed a woman standing in front of my van, her hands pressed against the hood. He looked away for just a moment, and when he looked back, she was at my driver's side window. The trucker said when she noticed him watching, she quickly ducked down beside my van. He kept checking throughout the night, but eventually couldn't see her anymore and fell asleep in his cab after making sure his doors were locked. I thought he was trying to scare me. Maybe truckers didn't like photographers using their rest stops. But then he suggested we check my windows for handprints where she had pressed against the glass. There were none, but when we checked the hood of my van, we found something unsettling: 2 small indentations in the frost, like handprints pressed into the thin layer of ice. Just then, we heard the other truck's door open, and an older driver joined us. "Ah, you've met our local visitor," he said matter-of-factly. "She's quite regular here. Does the same thing to all the newcomers. Asked about her at the diner down in the village. Apparently, she used to work at this station. Story goes she got lost in a blizzard one night while taking measurements. They found the station's door open the next morning, but never found her." The older driver seemed remarkably calm about the whole thing, but I couldn't handle it. The thought of being watched by something I couldn't see, out here in the endless polar night, was too much. I started my van and drove away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I've photographed the northern lights at many remote locations since then, but I've never returned to that weather station. Sometimes, when I'm editing my photos late at night, I find myself examining the dark backgrounds, half expecting to see a figure standing there, hands pressed against my van's hood, waiting to welcome another newcomer to her station. This happened during a trip with my brother through the Austrian Alps. We'd been to see a film festival in Salzburg, and instead of staying overnight, we decided to drive back to our home in northern Italy. I was 17 at the time, and my brother Thomas was 20. At that age, you feel invincible, like distance is just a number, and time is something you have in endless supply. The drive should have taken about 4 hours, crossing through some of the most beautiful mountain passes in Europe. We left Salzburg around 11 at night. The old navigation system in Thomas's Volkswagen Golf, guiding us through the winding mountain roads. We were in high spirits, discussing the films we'd seen, and sharing a packet of Austrian chocolates we'd bought at a gas station. Everything was fine, until the navigation system suddenly recommended a different route from our usual one. Instead of staying on the well-maintained mountain highway, it directed us onto a narrow alpine road. We assumed it was trying to avoid some late-night construction or accident, so we followed its directions, turning off onto what the locals called the Old Salt Road, a historic trading route that wound through the mountains. The further we drove, the more unsettling things became. The streetlights disappeared, leaving us in complete darkness except for our headlights. The road narrowed, with sharp drops on one side and towering rock faces on the other. Ancient mile markers, their numbers barely visible, occasionally caught the light of our headlights. I noticed my brother becoming increasingly tense, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. The cheerful conversation died away, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. That's when I noticed something odd in the side mirror headlights behind us, but they seemed to be running without the usual running lights. Thomas didn't respond when I first mentioned the car behind us. His face had lost all color, and he was completely focused on the road ahead. When I asked him again what was wrong, he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't look back. Something isn't right." My spine turned to ice. I wanted to look behind us, but the tone in my brother's voice stopped me. I'd never heard him sound so serious. We sat in tense silence as Thomas began to drive faster, taking the hairpin turns at speeds that made my heart race. The car behind us kept pace effortlessly, staying just far enough back that I couldn't make out its shape in the darkness. Then Thomas floored it. The Golf's engine screamed as we accelerated along the mountain road, taking curves at terrifying speeds. At any moment, I expected another vehicle to appear around one of the blind corners. I gripped my seat, too scared to speak, trusting my brother's driving but terrified of what was making him act this way. Suddenly, we swerved hard to the left, onto a smaller road I hadn't even noticed. The Golf's tires screeched as we took the turn, and for a moment I thought we were going to crash. When I opened my eyes, the headlights behind us had carried on straight ahead, disappearing into the darkness. Thomas's face was ghost white, his hands still clenched on the steering wheel. After a few moments of silence, he finally explained what had happened. Almost as soon as we turned onto the old road, he'd noticed we were being followed. The car behind us had appeared out of nowhere, driving without lights, until it got close enough for Thomas to see it in the rearview mirror. What had terrified my brother wasn't just the car following us, it was the driver. When he checked his mirror, he could see the interior light was on in the pursuing vehicle, illuminating the driver's face. The man was smiling, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was a twisted grimace, accompanied by eyes that seemed to glow with an unnatural intensity in the darkness. We made it home safely that night, but the experience changed both of us. Thomas became more cautious after that, always planning our routes carefully and avoiding mountain roads at night. Sometimes I torture myself, wondering what that grinning driver's intentions were. Was he trying to hurt us somewhere? Did he know those mountain roads well enough to predict where we'd go? The old navigation system turned out to be badly out of date, directing us onto roads that hadn't been used as main routes for years. We later learned that particular mountain pass had a history of disappearances, though most locals wouldn't talk about it. These days, whenever I drive through the Alps at night, I stick to the main highways, and I always check my rearview mirror for cars driving without lights. This happened last autumn, when my wife Lena and I were heading to our cabin in the Finnish wilderness. We'd inherited it from my grandfather, who'd built it himself in the 1970s on the shores of Lake Inari. The cabin's isolation was part of its charm. It sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by dense pine forest and overlooking the dark waters of the lake. We left Helsinki later than planned that Friday, both of us finishing work around 7 in the evening. The drive would take about 12 hours, putting us at the cabin around 1 in the morning. This wasn't ideal, but we were used to the journey. Lena often found inspiration for her paintings in the northern wilderness, and I'd been documenting local archaeological sites in the area. The cabin's remoteness meant you couldn't stumble upon it by accident. To reach it, you had to drive along the main highway until you reached a small village, then take a narrow dirt road for about 5 kilometers. After crossing an old wooden bridge over a stream, you'd follow another winding track that ended at our cabin. The property was so isolated that we had to use a satellite phone for emergencies. Mobile signals didn't reach this far north. We made good time until we hit the dirt road. The autumn rains had turned it into a muddy track, and my old Volvo wasn't exactly built for off-road driving. As we approached the wooden bridge, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. This was unusual. The only other cabin on this side of the lake belonged to old Matty Vertinen, and he never visited after the first snow. The vehicle behind us was a pickup truck, its powerful LED light bar illuminating the entire road. I didn't think much of it until we crossed the bridge and took the fork toward our cabin. The truck followed. This made my skin crawl. There were only 2 properties down this road, and I knew Matty wasn't coming up here this late in the season. "Is that your neighbor?" Lena asked, clearly having noticed the truck as well. "No, Matty drives an ancient Nissan. I don't recognize this one." We continued down the track, the truck maintaining its distance behind us. Then we reached the point where the road dipped down toward the lake, and my heart sank. The autumn rains had flooded the road completely. It looked more like a river than a path. In all my years of visiting the cabin, I'd never seen it this bad. I had a decision to make. I could either stop and wait for the mysterious truck to catch up, or risk driving my car through what looked like a small lake. The truck's headlights were bearing down on us, and something about the situation felt deeply wrong. I shifted into a lower gear and drove into the water. The flooding was worse than it looked. Water came up over the headlights, plunging us into near darkness. I could barely see where the road was, using the trees on either side as guides. Through the passenger window, the black water of the lake seemed to blend with the flooded road. It felt like we were driving through the middle of the lake itself. "Is this safe?" Lena whispered, her voice tense with fear. The answer was no, of course not. But I couldn't stop now. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw the truck had stopped at the edge of the flooded section, its bright lights illuminating our struggle through the water. The next few minutes felt like hours as we pushed through the flood. Finally, the road began to rise, and we emerged from the water onto higher ground. I looked back to see the truck still sitting there, its lights blazing across the flood. We drove around the final bend to our cabin, and I killed the engine, both of us sitting in silence, listening to the water drip from the car's undercarriage. That night, we double-checked all the locks and kept the cabin's lights off. I stayed up late, watching through the windows, but the truck never came through the flood. When we checked the road the next morning, we found deep tire tracks where the truck had turned around. We never found out who was in that truck or what they wanted. The local police said they'd keep an eye out, but in an area this remote, that didn't mean much. These days, we always check the weather reports for flooding before heading up to the cabin, and we never drive the dirt road after dark. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the northern lights dance over the lake, I find myself looking back down that flooded road, wondering about the truck that followed us and what might have happened if we'd stopped instead of pushing through the water. I've been driving cargo trucks in Iceland for several years now, mainly transporting scientific equipment to various research stations across the country. You get used to the isolation, the vast landscapes of black sand and volcanic rock, the sudden weather changes that can turn a clear day into a complete whiteout. But what happened during one summer delivery still makes me question everything I know about this strange, ancient land. I was transporting sensitive seismic monitoring equipment to a research station near Vatnajökull Glacier. Even during the summer's perpetual daylight, the weather can turn fierce without warning. That day, the forecast predicted a severe storm system moving in from the North Atlantic. I should have waited it out, but the equipment was urgently needed for monitoring potential volcanic activity. The storm hit harder than expected. Dense, gray clouds rolled in across the black desert, bringing with them sheets of rain so thick I could barely see beyond my windshield. The wind howled around my truck, making the whole vehicle shudder. I decided to pull over and wait it out, better safe than sorry when you're carrying equipment worth millions of krona. I found a relatively sheltered spot beside some volcanic rocks and killed the engine. The rain drummed against the roof of my cab, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the desolate landscape. Despite it being summer, with 24 hours of daylight, the storm had turned the world dark as twilight. I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of something hitting my truck. Not the wind or rain, this was different. It sounded like someone was checking the cargo attachments between the cab and trailer. These weren't ordinary sounds. Each one was distinct, A tug, a scrape, a metallic rattle. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of something heavy climbing onto the back of my trailer. The whole truck shifted with the weight. At first, I thought it might be debris blown by the wind. But then I heard what could only be footsteps moving across the top of the trailer. Without thinking, I slammed my hand against the cab wall, hoping to scare off whatever it was. What happened next still haunts me. I heard a human scream, not of pain or fear, but something else entirely. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world, like metal grinding against stone, amplified through human vocal cords. Then came the thud of something heavy falling from my trailer. Through my mirrors, I could see movements in the rain, not one person, but several. They were calling to each other in voices that sounded wrong, speaking words that seemed to catch in their throats, as if they'd forgotten how to use them. I switched on my external lights, illuminating the area around my truck. What I saw made me question my sanity. A group of people, maybe 6 or 7, stood in the rain. They wore dark, weather-stained clothing, but it wasn't their appearance that disturbed me most. It was how they moved. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like malfunctioning automatons trying to mimic human behavior. "What do you want?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Check. Abandoned vehicles," one of them responded, his voice cracking and distorted. "Secure them. Make sure no one's left behind." They exchanged glances with each other, their movements still unnaturally rigid. A woman stepped forward, her eyes were wide and unfocused, like someone in a trance. When she opened her mouth to speak, no words came out, just a long, rattling breath. "You need to leave," the first one spoke again, more insistent this time. Now I didn't need to be told twice. I started the engine and drove away as fast as I safely could in the storm, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally reached the next fuel station, the attendant could see something had shaken me. I told him what happened, but he just shook his head, saying he'd never heard of anything like it. I've made that same drive many times since then, but never during a storm. The scientific equipment was delivered safely, but I never reported what happened. How could I explain it? Who would believe me? Sometimes when I'm driving across those black sand deserts and I see a storm approaching, I wonder about those people. Were they real? Were they even people at all? Or were they something else? Something that only appears when the storm clouds roll in and the wind howls across the ancient Icelandic landscape. The memory of their jerky movements and distorted voices still sends chills down my spine. In a land of volcanoes, glaciers, and legends of hidden people, maybe there are some things we're not meant to understand. But one thing's for certain. I never stop my truck during storms anymore, no matter how bad the weather gets. As the only doctor serving several remote villages in the Romanian Carpathians, I'm used to driving through the mountains at odd hours. But what happened on that winter night, just before our traditional winter festival, still makes me question everything I thought I knew about our old folklore. I was returning from an emergency call in one of the outlying villages. An elderly woman with heart problems. The time was around 3 in the morning, and I was driving along the winding mountain road that connects our scattered communities. It was the kind of darkness you only find in the mountains, where the forest seems to swallow any light that dares to exist. The old Dacia I drove knew these roads well, its headlights cutting through the darkness as I navigated the familiar turns. Fresh snow had fallen earlier that evening, covering everything in a pristine white blanket that seemed to glow faintly in the starlight. The temperature gauge on my dashboard showed 15 degrees below zero, typical for a December night in the Carpathians. In these mountains, stories of strange encounters are as old as the peaks themselves. Our grandparents told tales of ancient spirits that roamed these passes, particularly during the winter festivals when the barrier between worlds was said to be thinnest. I'd always dismissed these as mere folklore, the kind of stories you tell children to keep them from wandering too far from home. Then I saw something that made me question every rational thought I'd ever had. As I rounded a sharp bend, my headlights illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road. This wasn't unusual in itself. Sometimes shepherds moved their flocks at night to avoid the bitter day temperatures. But what I saw wasn't a shepherd. The figure stood perfectly still, wearing what appeared to be traditional winter clothing. But it was what was on its head that made my blood freeze. It wore a mask, but not the kind you'd find at a festival or carnival. This was ancient looking, crafted from what appeared to be real goat skin and bone. The horns weren't the plastic props you'd see at a costume shop. They were real horns, massive and curved, rising from the mask like ancient tree branches. But it was the eyes that truly terrified me. Through the eye holes of the mask, I could see eyes that reflected my headlights like a wild animal's, but with an intelligence that was unmistakably human. The mouth of the mask was fixed in a terrible grin, showing real teeth that seemed too long, too sharp to be natural. I slowed my car, more out of shock than caution. The figure's head tilted slightly as it watched my approach, moving in a way that reminded me of a predator studying its prey. Every instinct told me to turn around, to get as far away from this thing as possible. Then it moved. The movement wasn't human. In an instant, the figure lunged toward my car with impossible speed, its arms outstretched. I floored the accelerator, swerving into the opposite lane to avoid it. As I passed, I caught a glimpse of those eyes again. They seemed to glow with their own inner light now, and the grin had somehow grown wider. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next village, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. When I finally pulled over at the local church, I sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as exhaustion, a trick of light and shadow playing on my tired mind. But I knew better. I'd grown up hearing stories of the ancient spirits of the Carpathians, particularly about one figure that appeared during the winter festivals, a being that wore the skin and horns of a goat, who tested travelers on the mountain roads. The old stories said it would appear to those who traveled alone at night, particularly in the days leading up to our traditional celebrations. I've driven that road hundreds of times since that night, but never again during the festival season. When patients call at night during that time, I take the longer route, the one that follows the valley instead of cutting through the mountains. Some of my colleagues laugh when I tell them why, but the older villagers nod in understanding. They know, as I now know, that some of our old stories aren't just tales to frighten children. Sometimes, in the ancient mountains of Romania, when the winter night is at its darkest and the old festivals approach, you might encounter something that doesn't belong to the world of daylight and reason. Something that wears a goat's face and grins with too many teeth, waiting on the lonely mountain roads for travelers who dare to drive alone. After 15 years of guiding scientific expeditions through the Atacama Desert in Chile, I thought I'd seen everything this ancient landscape could offer. The Atacama is the driest non-polar desert in the world, a place where the stars shine so brightly that astronomers from around the globe come to study the night sky. But what happened during one late-night drive still defies any rational explanation I can think of. I was working as a navigation specialist for an international team of astronomers. We were tracking a rare meteor shower that only occurs once every 70 years. Our destination was a remote observation point about 4 hours' drive from the nearest town, along the dirt roads that cut through the desert's red terrain. The Atacama at night is different from any other place I've known. The lack of moisture in the air makes the stars impossibly bright, and the landscape takes on an almost Martian quality. Rock formations cast long shadows under the starlight, and the silence is so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. We were driving in 2 vehicles. I was leading in a modified Land Cruiser, equipped with advanced navigation systems and emergency gear. My colleague Miguel followed in another vehicle with the astronomical equipment. The dirt road we were following wound between ancient volcanic formations, their jagged silhouettes black against the star-filled sky. Around 2 hours into our journey, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror headlights, but not from Miguel's vehicle. These were different, more intense, with a strange bluish tint that seemed out of place in the desert night. At first, I assumed it was another research team, heading to one of the many observatories scattered across the Atacama. I radioed Miguel. "Do you see the vehicle behind us?" His response was immediate. "What vehicle?" "There's nothing between us." I checked my mirrors again. The lights were still there, growing brighter. I could now see they belonged to what appeared to be a truck, but something about it seemed wrong. The lights were too bright, too blue, and the vehicle seemed to move with an unnatural smoothness over the rough desert road. We approached a series of sharp turns that wound through a narrow canyon. The truck behind us suddenly accelerated, its lights becoming blindingly bright. I radioed Miguel again, telling him to maintain his distance, as I would need to speed up to avoid being blinded by the mysterious vehicle's lights. Then something happened that I still can't explain. As we came to a particularly sharp curve, the truck behind us didn't turn. Instead, its lights continued straight ahead, not following the road at all. But here's the impossible part. Rather than crashing into the rock face ahead, the lights began to rise, as if the vehicle was ascending into the night sky. The lights grew brighter, almost painfully so, then suddenly vanished, not gradually fading away, but disappearing in an instant, as if someone had flipped a switch. For a moment, the desert seemed darker than ever before. Miguel's voice crackled over the radio. Did you see that? The truck that flew?" I responded, hardly believing the words as I spoke them. "I thought I was hallucinating," he said. "But you saw it too." We pulled over at the next safe spot, our headlights illuminating nothing but the endless desert ahead. Neither of us spoke for a while, both trying to process what we'd witnessed. We were scientists, used to looking for rational explanations, but but there was nothing rational about what we'd just seen. When we finally reached the observation point, we didn't mention the incident to the rest of the team. How could we explain it? A truck that ignored the laws of physics, ascending into the night sky like some kind of mechanical shooting star. The meteor shower that night was spectacular, but I found myself watching the horizon instead of the sky, half expecting to see those strange blue lights return. They never did, but the incident changed something in me. The Atacama Desert has been studied extensively by scientists from around the world. Its clear skies perfect for astronomical observation. But perhaps in this ancient landscape, where the stars seem close enough to touch, there are still phenomena that our scientific instruments can't explain. I've guided many more expeditions through the Atacama since then, but I've never seen those lights again. Sometimes, when I'm driving those same desert roads at night, I find myself checking my mirrors, wondering if somewhere out there, that impossible vehicle is still roaming the desert, defying gravity and logic in equal measure. I love the midnight drives between the fjords, even though they're part of my job as a remote area paramedic in northern Norway. There's something magical about the summer's endless daylight, when the sun barely touches the horizon before rising again. But there are moments during these drives when reality seems to thin, when the boundary between the known and unknown becomes as blurred as the twilight sky. I'd like to share 3 encounters that all share what I've come to call the warning scream. The first incident occurred during a routine transfer between hospitals. I was driving the ambulance along the winding road that hugs the edge of Geirangerfjord, where cliffs rise straight from the water like ancient walls. The endless summer twilight painted everything in surreal shades of blue and silver. I was about halfway through my journey when I heard it, a sound that defied description. It was like the screech of massive steel doors being torn apart, but with an almost organic quality to it. Without thinking, I pulled the ambulance into a small turnout. Seconds later, a torrent of rocks cascaded down the cliff face, right where I would have been driving. The road ahead disappeared under the rock slide, and I sat there, heart pounding, realizing how close I'd come to disaster. The second encounter happened during another midnight run, this time along the narrow road that winds through Trollstigen. The white night was particularly bright, the sky a perpetual dawn. That otherworldly scream tore through the air again, but this time it seemed to carry a warning. The number 7 echoed in its unearthly tone. I instinctively jerked the wheel, and my ambulance skidded onto the shoulder. A fraction of a second later, a logging truck came barreling around the bend, partially in my lane. If I hadn't moved, we would have collided head-on. The third and most recent incident occurred during a winter shift. Despite the permanent darkness of the polar night, I had to transport emergency medical supplies between clinics. The aurora borealis danced overhead, casting an eerie green glow over the snow-covered landscape. The scream came again, louder than ever before. This time I could have sworn it was saying 13. I immediately pulled into the nearest rest area, even though I'd only been driving for a few hours. Something about that sound commanded obedience. The next morning, I counted 13 vehicles that had slid off the icy road during the night, each one with deep gashes in their sides, as if they'd been clawed by some enormous force. I was the only driver, who'd stopped before reaching that treacherous stretch of road. I've come to respect that scream, that impossible sound that seems to exist somewhere between natural phenomenon and something else entirely. Some of my colleagues suggest it might be the sound of the earth itself, the groaning of ancient rock faces, or the movement of glaciers. Others, particularly the older drivers, speak of the Vardøger, a Norwegian spirit that warns of impending danger. I'm not sure what to believe. All I know is that when I drive those lonely roads between the fjords, whether in the endless light of summer or the eternal darkness of winter, I keep my windows slightly open. I'm always listening for that warning scream, that sound that seems to pierce the veil between what we know and what we can't explain. The mountains of Norway are ancient, carved by glaciers, and shaped by forces we can barely comprehend. Perhaps in these places where the sun never fully sets in summer and never truly rises in winter, there are things that exist beyond our understanding, things that, for whatever reason, choose to warn us of danger ahead. So if you're ever driving these roads, particularly in those liminal hours when day and night blur together, and you hear something that sounds like steel being torn apart, or a scream that carries words in its tone, pull over. Wait, listen. Sometimes the difference between life and death is heeding a warning that comes from somewhere beyond our everyday world. During my work photographing Scotland's historic railways, I encountered something that still haunts me. I was documenting the Glenfinnan Viaduct, a magnificent Victorian structure that curves through the highlands like a stone serpent. The bridge has stood for over a century, carrying countless trains across its 21 arches, each one rising 100 feet above the valley floor. That spring morning was typically Scottish. A light mist clung to the hills, and the sun struggled to break through the clouds. I'd arrived early, hoping to capture the bridge in the ethereal morning light. The location was popular with tourists, but at this hour I had the place to myself. I was setting up my equipment on a small rise, overlooking the viaduct, when I heard voices. A group of young people emerged from the morning mist, university students, by the look of them, probably on a weekend adventure. They were carrying expensive camera equipment and tripods, clearly there for the same reason I was. The viaduct has several maintenance walkways along its length, and despite the clearly posted warning signs, these often tempt photographers looking for the perfect shot. I watched with growing unease as one of the students, a young man with a professional-looking camera, made his way onto one of these walkways. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The young man was positioning himself for a shot, leaning out slightly to capture the curve of the viaduct. His foot caught on something, a loose stone, perhaps, or an uneven board. He stumbled, his camera swinging wildly on its strap. For a moment, he teetered on the edge of the walkway, his friends crying out in alarm. Then he fell. I heard the sickening impact before I saw it. When I rushed to help, I found him lying motionless on the rocky ground below. Blood stained his light-colored jacket, spreading like a crimson flower across his chest. His camera lay nearby, its lens shattered but its memory card intact. Emergency services arrived quickly. In these remote parts, they're well practiced at reaching difficult locations. But it was too late. The young man's friends stood in shocked silence as the paramedics worked, their own cameras forgotten in their hands. The next day, barriers appeared on the maintenance walkways. New warning signs were posted. The local paper ran a small article about the accident, mentioning that this wasn't the first death at the viaduct, though most previous incidents had been from the Victorian era, when safety standards were more lax. I couldn't bring myself to return to the viaduct for months. When I finally did, it was different. The mist still clung to the stones in the morning light, and the structure remained as magnificent as ever. But now I saw it differently. Behind its grandeur lay a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong, how a moment's carelessness can lead to tragedy. I still photograph historic railways, but I'm more cautious now. Sometimes when I'm setting up a shot, I think about that young photographer and his final frame, a picture that was never taken. It reminds me that no photograph is worth risking your life for. The viaduct stands as it always has, its stone arches reaching across the Highland Valley. But for those who know its history, it carries not just trains but memories, some glorious, some tragic. It's a reminder that these magnificent structures, while beautiful, demand respect. They've witnessed both triumph and tragedy, and they hold their secrets in their ancient stones. I've been clearing snow from Swedish roads north of the Arctic Circle for the past decade. You see all sorts of strange things during the polar night, the northern lights playing tricks with your vision. Snow formations that look like figures in the darkness. But what happened last winter was something entirely different. My job involves keeping the E10 highway clear during the winter months. It's a vital route that connects the northern communities, running through some of the most isolated areas in Europe. During the polar night, which lasts for several months, we work in perpetual darkness, with only our vehicle lights to guide us. That particular night, I was driving my snowplow along a stretch between Kiruna and Narvik. The temperature gauge showed minus 30 degrees Celsius, and the forecast warned of an approaching storm. The darkness was absolute, the kind that seems to swallow your headlights after a few meters. The only other illumination came from the occasional glimpse of the aurora borealis, painting the snow in ghostly green hues. I'd been on the road for several hours when I first noticed the car in my mirrors. It was an old Volvo, probably from the 1980s. Its paint faded to an indeterminate color in my lights. Nothing unusual about that. These old Volvos are common up here, reliable in the harsh climate. But something about this one felt wrong. The car would appear in my mirrors, its headlights dim and yellowed, then disappear, only to show up again a few minutes later. At first, I assumed it was taking the same route as me, maybe falling behind when I cleared heavy snow, then catching up on the cleared sections. But then I noticed something strange. There were no tire tracks behind it in the freshly plowed snow. I radioed back to the station. "Base, are there any other vehicles registered on this stretch tonight?" "Negative," came the response. "You're the only one out there. Storm's coming in fast. You should head back soon." The car passed me again, and this time I got a clear look at the occupants. 2 figures sat in the front seat, both staring straight ahead with an unnatural stillness. Their faces were pale, too pale like the snow itself, and they didn't seem to blink. When they passed me the next time, both figures turned their heads in perfect unison to stare at me. Their movements were mechanical, synchronized in a way that made my skin crawl. Their eyes reflected my lights like animals' eyes, but there was something else there, an awareness that felt ancient and cold. At the next emergency stop area, I pulled over, hoping to let them pass for good. The old Volvo appeared behind me, slowing to a crawl. Through my mirrors, I could see both figures still staring, their faces now pressed against their windows, breath fogging the glass. Except there was no fog, despite the freezing temperature. I radioed the station again, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. There's a vehicle following me. An old Volvo. Can you check traffic cameras? Cameras show nothing, the operator replied. Just your plow and a lot of snow. The Volvo pulled alongside my snowplow. Now I could see details I wished I hadn't. The way their skin seemed to have a bluish tint, how their clothes appeared to be from a different era, the absolute stillness of their postures. The driver's head turned toward me with that same mechanical precision, and his mouth opened in what might have been a smile, revealing nothing but darkness behind his lips. I engaged the plow and drove away as fast as I safely could in the conditions. In my mirrors, I saw the Volvo pull off onto a side road that I knew had been closed for decades. A road that led to an abandoned mining town that had been empty since the 1960s. When I finally reached the station, my colleagues found me sitting in my cab, shaking. The station chief, an old-timer who'd worked these roads for 30 years, listened to my story without comment. When I finished, he sighed and pulled out an old logbook. "You're not the first," he said, showing me entries dating back decades. Always the same description, old Volvo, 2 figures, mechanical movements. Always during the polar night, always on that stretch of road. He wouldn't elaborate further, but I noticed he had circled certain dates in the logbook, dates that corresponded with disappearances in the area, all unsolved. I still drive the snowplow route, but never alone on that stretch anymore. We work in pairs there now, especially during the polar night. Sometimes, when the aurora is particularly bright, and the snow swirls in strange patterns around our lights, I think I catch glimpses of an old Volvo in my mirrors. But I never look too long, and I never ever stop. The Arctic night holds secrets, some of them older than the roads we plow. Sometimes it's better not to look too closely at what drives alongside you in the darkness, especially when the northern lights cast shadows that shouldn't exist, and the only witnesses are the endless snow and the frozen stars above. I had been working security at the Morrison Modern Art Gallery for about 3 months. The position seemed unusual for such a small venue. It was essentially a converted Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town, showcasing contemporary art pieces. But the owner, Robert Pierce, had insisted on having overnight security. The gallery itself was an architectural marvel, high ceilings, ornate moldings, and large windows that let in the moonlight. During my night shifts, I would often find myself admiring the abstract sculptures and avant-garde paintings that filled the rooms. My military background made me perhaps overqualified for the job, but after 15 years in the service, I appreciated the quieter pace. That night started like any other. I arrived at 9, activated the security systems, and headed to my small office where the surveillance monitors were set up. The gallery only had external cameras, and they weren't exactly state-of-the-art. The first couple of hours passed slowly, filled with routine checks and the occasional glance at the monitors. Around 1 in the morning, I heard what sounded like a soft click echoing through the halls. I sat up, alert and listening. After 20 years of security work, both military and civilian, you develop a sixth sense for these things. Something wasn't right. I opened my office door and stepped into the hallway. Everything looked exactly as it should. The 3 exhibition rooms were all closed, just as I'd left them. Walking quietly, I checked each room. The moonlight cast long shadows across the floors, but nothing seemed disturbed. The valuable pieces, including a particularly striking glass sculpture worth $500,000, were all in place. By now, enough time had passed that I started doubting what I'd heard. The security system should have triggered if any of the main doors had been opened. I returned to my office, leaving the door open this time to better hear any unusual sounds. 20 minutes passed uneventfully. I had almost convinced myself it was nothing when another sound echoed down the corridor. The unmistakable creak of a door opening slowly. I was on my feet instantly, moving swiftly but silently toward the sound. One of the exhibition room doors was slightly ajar. I knew with absolute certainty that I had closed it earlier. My heart began to race as I approached, years of training kicking in automatically. As I pushed the door wider, I noticed a shadow move along the far wall. That's when I saw him, a man crouched behind one of the pedestals, displaying a small bronze sculpture. He had dark hair and deep-set eyes that locked onto mine the moment I spotted him. His expression was a mixture of rage and fear, like a cornered animal. Before I could react, he lunged forward. I didn't wait to see if he was armed. My combat training took over and I turned, sprinting for the main entrance. The security system would automatically notify the police when I opened the doors. Behind me, I could hear his footsteps pounding against the hardwood floors. I burst through the front doors into the cool night air, the alarm blaring behind me. From a safe distance, I watched the entrance, waiting for the police to arrive. Within 30 seconds, the man came running out, disappearing around the side of the building into the darkness. When the police arrived, we reviewed the security footage, but there was no sign of how the man had entered the building. Mr. Pierce insisted nothing was missing when we discussed it the next day, but something about his reaction seemed off. Looking back, I suspect he knew more than he let on. After all, who hires military-trained security for a small art gallery? I stayed on for a few more months before taking a better position elsewhere. To this day, I still wonder about that night. Was it really about the art, or was there something else hidden in that gallery? Some questions, I suppose, are better left unanswered. The city was alive with New Year's Eve excitement, despite the heavy snowfall that had been coming down since morning. I was working a part-time job at Golden Lotus, a family-owned Thai restaurant that had become surprisingly popular in our college town. Being a student meant I was always grateful for extra cash, so I never complained about working holiday shifts when everyone else wanted time off. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere was warm and busy families picking up their last orders of the year. The smell of lemongrass and basil filling the air, and the constant sound of woks sizzling in the kitchen. Around 8, my manager told me to switch to deliveries. The dining room was finally slowing down, but online orders were still pouring in. After a quick delivery, I picked up another order from the kitchen and got back on the road. It was a single order of pad thai to be delivered to a house 20 minutes away, at least according to the GPS. The streets were eerily empty now, a stark contrast to the bustling restaurant I'd left behind. The snow was falling gently, only visible under the orange glow of street lights, creating an almost peaceful scene. Eventually, I reached my destination, but something felt off. The house wasn't in a neighborhood at all. It was a solitary structure set back from the road, with a long gravel driveway leading up to it. The property was surrounded by snow-covered pine trees, and while Christmas decorations covered the house and front yard, not a single light shone from within. As I walked up to the porch, I noticed footprints in the snow, but instead of leading to the front door, they curved around to the side of the porch. I found this strange, but figured it wasn't my business. I knocked on the door, shivering in the cold. After 30 seconds of silence, I knocked again. The quiet was absolute, just the soft whisper of falling snow and a gentle breeze. I checked the receipt to confirm I needed payment, then knocked one final time, very loudly. Still nothing. Frustrated and cold, I knocked once more before giving up. Walking back to my car, I got in and tried to start it. The engine kept stalling in the cold. As I repeatedly tried to get it going, I glanced up and froze. There was a figure standing outside the house. They were completely covered, heavy winter coat, gloves, boots, and most disturbingly, wearing what looked like a traditional Japanese fox mask. I got out of my car. "Did you order the pad thai? I've been knocking on your door for 5 minutes." They said nothing, but began walking toward me. Something about their deliberate, unhurried pace made my skin crawl. It took me a few seconds to realize something wasn't right, and I quickly got back in my car. The way they moved, maintaining their steady pace, gave me the impression they knew I couldn't leave. I started dialing 911 as they approached my window. As the operator asked about my emergency, the person began speaking in a deep, distorted voice, repeatedly asking if I needed help. I gave the operator my location as best I could. The masked figure was getting impatient, moving faster and looking around as if searching for something. I kept trying to start the engine, praying it would work. They reached into their coat pockets, clearly searching for something. But their movements became frantic when they couldn't find whatever they were looking for. They struck my window several times, trying to break it, before running back to the side of the house. 2 minutes passed as I sat there, trying to decide whether to wait for the police or abandon my car and run for it. Then I saw the flashing blue and red lights in my mirror, and at the same time, the masked figure appeared at the side of the house, holding something in their right hand. They saw the lights and instantly disappeared into the darkness. The police investigation revealed that the owners were away for the holidays. The person had plugged in their decorations, using an outside outlet to make it look like someone was home. While I was at the porch, they had tampered with something under my car to keep it from starting. They never found the person, but the most likely explanation was that they dropped their weapon while trying to break my window, which is why they ran back to retrieve it. I quit doing deliveries after that night. I later learned that this wasn't an isolated incident. There had been similar reports in the area, but no one had been caught. I'm just grateful my car wouldn't start when it did. A few seconds later could have made all the difference. It was a typical night in mid-March at Digital Hub, the small electronics store where I worked. Usually I handled afternoon shifts, but occasionally I'd cover someone's overnight shift. My manager had called that morning asking me to work from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. with overtime pay. The extra money was too good to pass up. The store wasn't large, but it was packed with everything from the latest smartphones to gaming consoles. LED strips lined the walls, casting a soft blue glow across the displays of tablets and laptops. Security cameras blinked silently in each corner, their red lights reflecting off the glass cases. Rain was hammering against the windows, and according to the weather alerts, a major storm was approaching. The weather seemed to keep most people at home. The store was completely empty. After sitting inside for an hour, watching raindrops race down the windows, I decided to secure the outdoor signage. I threw on my raincoat and stepped outside. The neon open sign was swaying dangerously in the wind, and several display banners needed to be taken down. As I was collecting the last few items, I noticed a figure standing across the street. Through the curtain of rain, I could make out a man pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, getting completely drenched. Something about his behavior seemed off, but I assumed he was probably just waiting for a ride. I finished up and headed back inside, the fluorescent lights humming above me as I dried off. 2 hours passed as the storm intensified. Thunder began rolling in the distance, and soon after, fierce winds and even heavier rain came swooping in. The whole building started to shake, the windows rattling in their frames. At one point, I thought the front doors would break off their hinges as they swung violently in the wind. I quickly engaged the security locks to keep them in place. Moving toward the back of the store, I went into the storage room, away from the windows and their view of the tempest outside. The room was filled with shelves of boxed electronics and spare parts, the only sound being the distant rumble of thunder and the occasional creak of the building. Maybe 30 minutes after the storm started, through all the chaos of noise, I heard something else, a muffled sound. It took several repetitions before I realized it was someone banging on the front doors. Through the security camera feed on my phone, I could see someone outside, repeatedly hitting the glass. I left the storage room and looked down the main aisle. There was someone looking in at me, still pounding on the doors. My heart started racing as I recognized him. It was the same man I'd seen earlier. I quickly unlocked the doors, thinking he must be in trouble and needing shelter from the storm. He rushed inside, and I locked the doors behind him. The man was soaking wet, creating puddles on the polished floor. He didn't stop to thank me or explain himself. He just kept pacing back and forth between the aisles of smartphones and tablets, his shoes squeaking on the wet floor. After watching him for a minute, I started feeling extremely uncomfortable. As I walked to the counter to call the police, his eyes snapped to me, and he stopped moving. That's when I noticed his hands. They were cut and bruised across the knuckles, fresh blood mixing with the rainwater. "Don't," he said, clearly referring to the phone I was reaching for. I froze, my hand hovering over the receiver. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity, and I could see something dangerous brewing behind his stare. After a few tense seconds, he turned and resumed his pacing. The storm raged outside, violently shaking the building and adding to the horror of whatever was unfolding. I tried to think through my options as this clearly unstable man walked around just feet from me. I could try running, but I'd have to unlock the doors first. I could try calling the police, but that seemed too risky. Finally, I chose what was probably the riskiest option, doing nothing and just waiting. I stood there watching him for what felt like 20 minutes. At any moment, he could have snapped, but he didn't. After those 20 minutes, he gave me one last unsettling look, walked to the door, unlocked it, and walked back into the storm. I immediately called the police, whether because of the storm or because they didn't think it was urgent enough. It took over 30 minutes for an officer to arrive. By then, whoever that man was had vanished. The next day, a report was filed for a missing person. They never returned home from work after leaving the office at 11 p.m. Maybe I'm connecting completely different things, but the man in my store had clear signs of violence on his hands, and the timeline matches perfectly. While it's all just theories, I haven't been able to stop thinking about what I might have been in the middle of that night. I've since quit and taken a day job instead. Some questions are better left unanswered. The Riverview Advanced Treatment Center wasn't your typical medical facility. Situated on the outskirts of the city, it specialized in experimental treatments that most conventional hospitals wouldn't touch. As one of their night security officers, I'd grown accustomed to the eerie quiet of the empty corridors and the soft hum of sophisticated medical equipment. Working night shifts wasn't my first choice, but the pay was exceptional. I think they needed someone who wouldn't ask too many questions about the research conducted here. The clinic itself was 3 stories of modern architecture, all glass and steel, with restricted labs in the basement level. It was a particularly gloomy autumn night, with rain tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. I had just started my shift at 9, going through the usual routine of checking the security systems. The daytime staff had left hours ago, leaving the building in that peculiar state of emptiness that only medical facilities can achieve, sterile, silent, yet somehow alive with the gentle beeping of monitoring equipment. Around 11, I was doing my first round of the night. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows in the examination rooms, and the rain had picked up, creating strange patterns on the walls through the windows. As I passed the radiology department, I caught my reflection in the darkened glass and nearly jumped. Even after 6 months, this place could still give me the creeps. That's when I heard it, a metallic clicking sound that echoed through the hallways. I stood completely still, listening. In a building full of expensive medical equipment, any unexpected sound needed to be investigated. Still, something about this particular noise sent a chill down my spine. I walked slowly down the main corridor, my footsteps muffled by the industrial carpet. The 3 labs on this floor were all locked, their small window panels dark. Everything looked normal, but that sound had definitely come from somewhere. I continued my patrol, checking each room methodically. The treatment rooms were all secure, their specialized equipment silent under protective covers. In the pharmacy section, Rows of locked cabinets contained various medications, their contents worth a small fortune on the street. But everything was exactly as it should be. By now, I had almost convinced myself that the sound had been nothing, maybe just the building settling or the storm outside. The security systems were state-of-the-art. No one could enter without triggering multiple alarms. I returned to the security office, leaving the door open this time to better monitor any sounds. The wall of monitors showed empty hallways and locked doors, everything peaceful and secure. 20 minutes passed uneventfully when suddenly there was another sound. The unmistakable creak of a heavy door moving slowly on its hinges. My heart started racing as I left the office, moving carefully toward the source of the noise. As I rounded the corner to the research wing, I saw it. The door to Lab 3 was ajar. I knew with absolute certainty that I had checked that door earlier. Inside that lab was millions of dollars worth of experimental equipment and research data. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "Security. Is someone there?" The only response was the steady drone of equipment and the distant rumble of thunder. Moving closer to the door, I heard movement inside, the soft scuff of shoes on the polished floor. I felt frozen in place as a shadow crossed the sliver of light coming from the lab. Before I could react, a figure emerged from the doorway. It was a man in a dark jacket, his face oddly calm as he stared at me. What caught my attention, though, were his hands. He was wearing latex gloves, the kind our researchers used when handling sensitive materials. Without saying a word, he lunged forward. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my ears. I made it to the main entrance, the security system automatically notifying the police as I pushed through the doors. Standing in the rain, I watched as the man exited through a side door and disappeared into the darkness. When the police arrived, we reviewed the security footage. The man had somehow gained access through a service entrance, an entrance that required both a key card and a 6-digit code. The clinic's director arrived shortly after, his face pale as he inspected Lab 3. He insisted nothing was missing, but I noticed him having a heated, whispered conversation with one of the lead researchers. The investigation revealed that several encrypted hard drives had been accessed, though what information they contained, I never found out. The clinic upgraded their security system the next day, adding biometric scanners to all restricted areas. I stayed for another month before finding a new job. Something about that night made me realize there were things happening in that clinic that I didn't want to know about. They never caught the intruder, and the clinic never filed charges. Sometimes I wonder what was really going on in those labs, and what that man was looking for. But in places like that, maybe it's better not to know all the answers. Wonderland Family Entertainment Center was scheduled for renovation in just 2 weeks. The place had been running since the early 90s, and honestly, it showed. The neon lights were fading, the carpet was worn thin in places, and most of the arcade machines were practically antiques. Still, during the day, the place was filled with the sounds of children laughing and games, chiming their electronic melodies. At night, though, it was a different story. Working as the night manager, I'd gotten used to how the building transformed after hours. The cheerful cartoon characters painted on the walls seemed to watch you in the darkness, and the silent arcade machines cast long shadows across the floor. The animatronic band on the main stage, frozen mid-performance, looked particularly unsettling in the dim emergency lights. Snow had been falling steadily all day, and the forecast warned of a major storm coming. The weather had kept most people away, making my closing duties easier. I was in the back office around 9, going through some paperwork, when I heard what sounded like knocking coming from the front entrance. Moving through the dark arcade, I passed rows of silent games. The vintage Pac-Man machine still hummed softly. It had a habit of turning itself on sometimes, something our maintenance guy could never quite fix. As I approached the front doors, I noticed someone standing outside in the snow. They were just pacing back and forth near the entrance, seemingly unbothered by the freezing temperature or the fact that we were clearly closed. The building's exterior lights illuminated their figure against the falling snow, but I couldn't make out any details about their appearance. I returned to the office, trying to focus on my work, but something about that person's presence felt wrong. About 20 minutes later, I heard it, a deep thudding sound that echoed through the building. My heart jumped as I recognized it was coming from somewhere inside. I left the office and walked down the main corridor, past the silent prize counter with its shelves of stuffed animals. The emergency lights cast everything in a pale blue glow, making the normally cheerful space feel alien and wrong. That's when I heard movement from the main arcade area. Through the glass doors, I could see a figure moving between the game cabinets. They walked slowly, deliberately, as if searching for something. I stood frozen, watching as they disappeared behind a row of racing games, only to emerge moments later near the skee-ball lanes. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but before I could dial, the person stopped moving. They turned slowly, and I realized they were staring directly at me. Their face was obscured by shadow, but I could see their hands were cut and bleeding, leaving dark smudges on the arcade machines they touched. Without thinking, I ran for the emergency exit. The alarm blared as I pushed through the doors into the snowy night. I didn't stop until I reached my car, immediately calling the police. When they arrived 15 minutes later, the person was gone. The security cameras showed something strange. The person hadn't broken in through any entrance. They had been hiding inside since before closing, probably in the ball pit area where cameras didn't reach. Even more disturbing, the footage showed them methodically checking each arcade machine, as if looking for something specific. When the investigation team arrived, they found blood on several of the older machines, particularly ones from the early 90s. They also discovered something else. Small packages had been hidden inside some of the older cabinets, tucked behind the circuit boards. The police wouldn't tell me what was in them, but I overheard one officer mentioning something about evidence from an old case. The renovation was pushed forward, and the center was closed immediately. During the demolition, they found more packages hidden in various places throughout the building. I later learned that the center had different owners in the early 90s, and there were rumors about it being used as a front for something illegal. I never found out who that person was, or what they were really looking for. The police kept most of the details quiet, and the building was completely gutted during renovation. Sometimes I wonder about those old arcade machines. and what secrets they held all those years. But maybe some mysteries are better left in the past, buried under years of children's laughter and electronic chimes. It was a typical Friday evening of delivering for Harbor Eats, our coastal town's newest food delivery service. The fog had rolled in thick from the ocean, and the mournful sound of the harbor's foghorn echoed across the water every few minutes. As a college student, these evening delivery shifts helped pay my bills, even if they sometimes took me to the more isolated parts of our seaside community. The order came in around 8, just some soup and sandwiches from the local deli. Nothing unusual except for the delivery address, Old Point Lighthouse. I knew the place, everyone in town did. It had been converted into a private residence about a decade ago, though most locals couldn't understand why anyone would want to live in such an isolated spot. The lighthouse stood on a narrow peninsula, connected to the mainland by a single winding road. As I drove through the thickening fog, my headlights barely penetrating the gray wall ahead, the regular sweep of the lighthouse beacon created strange shadows that seemed to dance across the road. The closer I got, the more unsettling the scene became. The lighthouse keeper's house attached to the base of the tower was dark, except for a single light that appeared to be coming from somewhere near the top of the structure. The foghorn sounded again, closer now, its deep bass vibrating through my car. I parked in what I assumed was the driveway, really just a graveled area near the base of the lighthouse. The waves crashed against the rocks below, creating a constant background roar. As I approached the door with the delivery bag, I noticed something odd. There were no cars parked anywhere near the building. The door was solid oak, weathered by years of salt spray. I knocked, the sound seemingly swallowed by the fog. Through the dense mist, I could hear what sounded like a party or gathering, multiple voices talking and laughing, the noise seeming to come from high up in the lighthouse tower. When no one answered, I knocked again. The voices continued, but something about them started to sound wrong. They had an echo-like quality, as if they were recordings being played through old speakers. I checked my phone to verify the address. Yes, this was definitely the right place. As I stood there contemplating my next move, the door suddenly creaked open. A man stood in the doorway, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The interior behind him was completely dark, yet I could still hear the sounds of the party coming from above. "Why don't you come bring the food inside?" he said, his voice oddly flat. "They'll be happy to see you." The way he said it sent chills down my spine. Something was very wrong here. I started to stammer an excuse, but he interrupted. "They just want to thank you for working during this weather. You'll be glad you stopped by." All the while, the voices from above continued their constant chatter until suddenly they stopped. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crash of waves and the distant foghorn. The man glanced over his shoulder, clearly not expecting the sudden quiet. Taking advantage of his distraction, I dropped the bag on the porch and ran back to my car. Through my rearview mirror, I saw him step out onto the porch, his figure becoming increasingly indistinct in the fog as I drove away. I reported the incident to both the delivery service and the police. The next day, I learned something that made my blood run cold. The lighthouse had been empty for months. The previous owners had moved out, after claiming to hear voices in the tower, voices of people who weren't there. The police investigation found something even more disturbing. When they visited the lighthouse that night, they discovered old audio equipment in the tower speakers and playback devices, some dating back decades. But when they tried to power them on, nothing worked. The equipment had been dead for years. I quit the delivery service that night. Sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick from the ocean, I can still hear the lighthouse foghorn in the distance. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I can hear other sounds mixing with it, distant laughter and conversation, carried on the wind from a tower where no one lives. It was just another late shift for Liam Pierce, cruising through the quiet industrial district in his old Volkswagen Golf, delivering food orders to the night owls of Portland. The autumn fog was rolling in thick, turning the streetlights into hazy orbs that barely illuminated the empty roads. Around 1 a.m, after dropping off his last order, Liam noticed his gas gauge hovering dangerously close to empty. He pulled into Murphy's 24-hour gas station, one of those lonely outposts that seem to exist in a world of their own after midnight. The fluorescent lights above the pumps flickered erratically, creating an unsettling dance of shadows across the cracked concrete. As Liam filled his tank, he watched a few semi-trucks rumble past on the distant highway, their headlights briefly piercing the fog before disappearing again. Inside the small convenience store, the buzz of dying fluorescent tubes filled the silence. Liam grabbed a coffee and some energy bars, trying to shake off the fatigue from hours of driving. As he approached the counter, the bell above the door chimed. A man in dark blue coveralls walked in, his movements stiff and mechanical. What caught Liam's attention wasn't just the man's odd gait, but the way his head twitched slightly to the right every few seconds, like a broken clockwork toy. The stranger didn't grab anything from the shelves. Instead, he stood in the middle of the store, staring at Liam through the security mirror above the coffee station. Their eyes met in the reflection, and Liam felt his spine tingle as the man's face twisted into an unnatural smile. "Beautiful night for a drive, isn't it?" The man's voice was surprisingly high-pitched, with an odd sing-song quality that made Liam's skin crawl. Especially along Ridge Road. No traffic there. Nice and quiet. Liam mumbled something non-committal and quickly paid for his items. Through the store's grimy windows, he noticed a dark blue van parked at the far end of the lot, its headlights off but engine running. As he hurried to his car, he heard the bell chime again. The man's footsteps echoed on the wet pavement, moving faster, getting closer. Liam fumbled with his keys, his heart pounding against his ribs. Just as he got his door open, a hand grabbed his shoulder. The man's face was inches from his. That same twisted smile stretched across his features. "I said Ridge Road is nice this time of night. You should really check it out." Liam shoved him away and jumped into his car, locking the doors as the man slammed his palms against the window. In his rearview mirror, he saw 2 more figures emerge from the van, running toward him. He gunned the engine and peeled out of the lot, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. The blue van's headlights suddenly blazed to life behind him. But Liam knew these streets well from his delivery routes. He took a series of quick turns through the industrial maze until the van's lights disappeared from his mirrors. The police later told him there had been a string of disappearances in the area, all involving late-night drivers who had stopped at gas stations. They found the blue van abandoned 3 days later, but its owner was never located. Sometimes, on foggy nights when Liam drives past Murphy's, he still sees that twisted smile in the fluorescent glare of the gas station lights, a reminder that the darkest dangers often hide in the most ordinary places. The autumn wind whistled through the bare trees as Adrian Frost pulled his beaten-up Honda Civic into the circular driveway of the old Patterson estate. The Victorian mansion loomed before him, its weathered facade barely visible through the evening fog that had settled over the hillside. Working at Bella Luna Italian restaurant wasn't Adrian's dream job, but it helped pay for his art classes at the local college. Most deliveries were routine apartment complexes, suburban homes, occasionally the business district. But this address was different. The mansion's Gothic architecture seemed to pierce the misty sky, its spires disappearing into the low-hanging clouds. Tangles of dead ivy clutched at the walls like skeletal fingers, and the unkempt garden had long since surrendered to wild roses and thorny bushes. Adrian grabbed the pizza box and approached the wraparound porch, his shoes crunching on dead leaves. The porch boards creaked beneath each step, the sound echoing in the unusual stillness of the evening. No cars passed on the distant road, no birds called from the trees, just the hollow moan of wind through the mansion's many chimneys. The brass knocker felt ice cold against his knuckles as he announced his presence. Pizza delivery. His voice sounded small against the imposing facade. From somewhere inside, a grandfather clock chimed 9 times, its deep resonance seeming to vibrate through the floorboards. Then a voice called out, each word precisely measured like a metronome. Please, bring it inside. Something about the voice made Adrian's skin crawl. It wasn't quite right, too mechanical, too measured. But he'd already made the trek up here, and the tip might be worth it. The heavy door swung open at his touch, revealing a dimly lit foyer. Dust particles danced in the beam of his phone's flashlight. Ancient portraits lined the walls, their eyes seemingly following his movement as he stepped inside. "Hello, I've got your order," Adrian called out, his voice swallowed by the darkness. "In." Here, the same mechanical voice echoed from down the hallway. "Just setting the table." A cold draft swept through the foyer, carrying the musty scent of decay. Adrian's flashlight beam caught something moving in his peripheral vision. A shadow, perhaps, or a trick of the light. But when he turned, there was only emptiness. He took a few steps down the hallway, past a row of closed doors. The wooden floorboards protested under each step, and somewhere above, something shifted in the darkness. Then he saw it movement against the far wall. Not a person, but a shadow without a source, darker than the surrounding darkness. It seemed to twist and writhe, taking an almost human form. Adrian's survival instincts screamed. He dropped the pizza box and bolted for the door, his heart thundering in his chest. Behind him, he heard that mechanical voice, closer now. "Won't you stay?" He burst through the front door and sprinted to his car, fumbling with his keys as footsteps. Too many footsteps echoed from the porch. He didn't look back until he was on the main road, hands shaking on the steering wheel. The police investigation, the next day, revealed the mansion had been abandoned for decades. The electricity had been cut off years ago, and there was no way anyone could have been living there. But they found the pizza box in the foyer, exactly where Adrian had dropped it. And around it, in the thick dust, were dozens of footprints, all moving in impossible directions. Adrian quit his delivery job the next day. Sometimes, on foggy nights when he drives past the hill, he swears he can still hear that mechanical voice calling out through the mist, inviting unwary visitors inside for dinner. The Golden Lotus stood as one of the oldest establishments in Portland's historic district. Its red and gold facade a familiar landmark among the weathered brick buildings. Ryan Morgan had been working there for nearly 2 years, slowly climbing from busboy to assistant manager. The pay wasn't great, but the Wung family treated him like one of their own. December's chill had settled over the city, bringing with it a dense fog that transformed the narrow alleyways into ghostly corridors. Ryan was finishing his closing duties, wiping down the last of the tables, while keeping an eye on the security feed displayed on the small monitor behind the counter. Around 11:30, movement outside caught his attention. A man in dark clothing stood across the street, seemingly studying the restaurant's entrance. Ryan thought nothing of it. At first, late-night wanderers weren't unusual in this part of town. But something about the man's stillness made him uneasy. 20 minutes later, after storing the last of the clean dishes, Ryan noticed the same figure had moved closer, now standing directly under a flickering streetlight. The fog swirled around him, creating an almost theatrical effect. As Ryan watched through the front windows, the man's head snapped up, their eyes meeting through the glass. The security system beeped, indicating motion in the back alley. Ryan switched camera feeds, just in time to see a gray minivan pulling up behind the restaurant, its headlights off. 2 more men emerged from the vehicle, their movements synchronized and purposeful. Ryan's heart began to race. He double-checked the locks on all doors and dimmed the interior lights, hoping to appear closed. The restaurant's ancient heating system creaked and groaned, making it difficult to hear any outside movement. The phone in his pocket felt heavy as he debated calling the police. Would they think he was overreacting? The security cameras showed the 2 men from the van, methodically checking the building's rear exits, while their companion maintained his statue-like vigil out front. A sudden bang from the kitchen door made Ryan jump. One of the men was testing the lock, applying increasing pressure with each attempt. The old metal door groaned under the assault. Ryan retreated to the office, hands shaking as he dialed 911. The dispatcher had just answered when he heard glass breaking somewhere in the dining room. The man from the street had smashed through a window, sending shards of glass scattering across the floor tiles. Footsteps echoed through the restaurant, not just from the front, but from the kitchen as well. They had breached both entrances. Ryan whispered his location to the dispatcher, then crouched behind the office desk, watching shadows move across the gap under the door. "We know you're in here," a voice called out, unnaturally calm. "The building's surrounded. Make this easy on yourself." The office door handle began to turn slowly. Ryan held his breath, his eyes fixed on the metal handle. Just then, red and blue lights began flashing outside. accompanied by the wail of approaching sirens. The shadows under the door scattered. Ryan heard rapid footsteps, car doors slamming, and the screech of tires as the minivan peeled away. When the police entered minutes later, they found evidence of a professional break-in attempt. Cut phone lines, disabled exterior cameras, and tools left behind in their hurried escape. Later investigation revealed similar incidents at other restaurants in the area. All family-owned businesses with minimal security. The perpetrators were targeting employees who closed alone, using them to access safes and valuables. The Golden Lotus's outdated security system had ironically saved Ryan. Its separate power supply had kept the internal cameras running even after the main lines were cut. Ryan still works at the Golden Lotus, but never alone. The Wongs installed a state-of-the-art security system, though Ryan insists the best deterrent is their new policy. All closing shifts are now handled by at least 3 people. Sometimes, on foggy nights, he catches himself studying the street outside, watching for still figures in the mist. But the men in the minivan never returned, leaving their intentions a mystery that haunts the narrow alleyways of the historic district. Emma Holland thought she'd found the perfect escape from city life in her modernist mountain retreat. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered stunning views of the surrounding pine forest, while smart home technology provided all the conveniences she'd grown accustomed to. Her German shepherd, Luna, seemed to love the freedom of the mountain air as much as she did. Working as a remote interior designer allowed Emma to embrace the solitude. Her nearest neighbors were a mile down the winding mountain road, and the only regular visitors were the deer that grazed in her yard at dawn. The first sign that something was wrong came when her smart thermostat began acting erratically. The temperature would drop suddenly in the middle of the night, then spike to uncomfortable levels. Emma blamed it on the spotty mountain Wi-Fi. But then other devices started behaving strangely. One evening, while sketching designs for a client, the smart lights throughout the house began pulsing rhythmically. Emma checked her phone's control app, but it showed all systems functioning normally. Luna, usually calm and collected, stood at the window. Her ears perked forward, growling at something in the darkness. Emma's security cameras pinged with motion alerts more frequently, but each time she checked, the footage showed only empty darkness. The notifications always came from different angles, as if something was circling the house, testing its defenses. "It's just the wind," she told Luna, but her voice lacked conviction. The dog's behavior had changed. No more peaceful naps in sunny spots. Instead, Luna spent hours watching the tree line, her body tense, occasionally letting out low warning growls. One particularly cold night, Emma woke to find every smart device in her house offline. The familiar hum of technology had been replaced by absolute silence. Through the wall of windows, she could see her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Luna stood at the bedroom door, hackles raised, staring into the darkness of the hallway. Emma reached for her phone, but the screen remained black. Even her backup battery pack was dead. A notification sound broke the silence, but it wasn't from her phone. The sound came from the living room, where her laptop sat closed on the coffee table. As she watched, frozen in fear, the laptop's screen illuminated, casting a pale blue glow. Emma crept down the hallway, Luna close at her heels. The laptop was open now, though she distinctly remembered closing it. Text began appearing on the screen, one word at a time. Beautiful. House. Emma, her blood ran cold. No one out here knew her name. She hadn't even told her online clients her exact location. A figure appeared in the reflection of the window behind the laptop. Someone standing on her deck, watching her through the glass. Before she could scream, every smart light in the house blazed to life, then went dark again. In that split second of illumination, Emma saw him clearly, a man in dark clothing. His face obscured by a high-tech display mask showing scrolling code. He raised his hand in a wave, and her phone suddenly came back to life, buzzing with hundreds of delayed notifications. Luna's barking snapped Emma into action. She grabbed her car keys and ran, the dog right behind her. As she peeled out of the driveway, her rearview mirror showed all the lights in her house flashing in sequence, like some twisted farewell. The police found evidence of sophisticated hacking tools that had been monitoring her house for weeks. Her smart devices had been compromised one by one, giving the intruder eyes and ears inside her home. They never caught him, but they found his calling card, a small circuit board attached to a router, blinking with the same rhythmic pattern she'd seen on his mask. Emma sold the house a month later, returning to the relative safety of the city. She still works as a designer, but now she specializes in off-grid homes, where the only intelligence controlling the environment is human. Luna seems happier too, though sometimes, when Emma's laptop chimes with a notification, the dog still growls at the screen, as if remembering that night when technology turned against them. Snow fell in lazy spirals as Miles Shepard guided his old Subaru Outback along the winding forest road. Christmas was 2 days away, and he'd picked up an extra DoorDash shift to help cover his textbooks for next semester. The navigation app led him deeper into the pine forest, where the trees grew so close together they formed dark tunnels through the snow. The order seemed simple enough, just a hot meal from the local diner to an address marked as Pine Haven Lodge. But as Miles turned onto an unmarked road, the holiday music on his radio began to fade into static. After 15 minutes of careful driving, he spotted warm lights through the trees. The lodge appeared like something from a vintage Christmas card. A 2-story wooden structure with a steep alpine-style roof, completely decorated for the holidays. Strings of lights wrapped every beam and railing, their colors reflecting off the fresh snow. A wreath hung on the massive wooden door, and electronic candles glowed in every window. Miles parked beside a snow-covered pickup truck, the only other vehicle in sight. As he stepped out, his boots crunching in the deep snow, he heard what seemed to be a party in full swing laughter, music, the clink of glasses, all muffled by the thick walls of the lodge. The front porch creaked under his weight as he approached the door, the delivery bag clutched in his gloved hands. Before he could knock, something about the sounds from inside caught his attention. The laughter seemed to repeat at exact intervals, like a track set on loop. He pressed the doorbell, which triggered an elaborate sequence of musical chimes. The party sounds continued unchanged, but now he was certain they were recordings, playing through hidden speakers. "Hello," Miles called out, his voice swallowed by the snow-laden forest. DoorDash delivery. The door swung open slowly, revealing a warmly lit interior. Pine garlands draped the staircase, and a massive Christmas tree dominated the great room. But something was wrong. Despite the lights and music, a thick layer of dust covered everything. The tree's ornaments were faded and cracked, the garlands brittle with age. "Just bring it to the dining room," a voice called from somewhere inside. It sounded distant and hollow, like someone speaking through an old radio. "We're all waiting for you." Miles took one step inside, the floorboards groaning beneath him. The recorded party sounds suddenly stopped, leaving only the whisper of wind through the eaves. In the sudden silence, he heard footsteps upstairs, multiple sets, moving in perfect synchronization. The dining room table was visible through an archway, set for a feast that had never been served. Dusty plates and tarnished silverware laid out for guests long gone. As Miles watched, one of the chairs slowly pulled away from the table, though no one was there to move it. "Join us," the hollow voice said, now seeming to come from every direction at once. "Christmas dinner is served." Miles dropped the delivery bag and ran. Behind him, the party sounds resumed at full volume, but distorted now. The laughter twisted into something sinister, the music warped and wrong. As he sprinted to his car, the lodge's lights began to flicker and dim, as if whatever force occupied the building was losing power. He didn't stop driving until he reached the main road. When he reported the incident to the police, they found the lodge dark and empty. Local records showed that Pine Haven Lodge had burned down during a Christmas party 20 years ago. Every holiday season, hikers reported seeing lights and hearing music from the ruins. But by the time anyone investigated, they would find only cold ashes and silence. The delivery bag was never found, though sometimes, on snowy nights around Christmas, drivers passing by the old lodge road claim they can smell fresh diner food on the wind and hear distant laughter echoing through the trees. Always the same laughs, always in the same order, playing endlessly in the dark. It was late November, and the constant drizzle made Portland's suburbs feel even more isolated than usual. I had just started working for Uber Eats to help cover my college expenses, a decision I was beginning to question as I navigated through the maze of dimly lit streets in my beat-up Honda Civic. Around 11:30, an order came through that caught my attention. The payout was unusually high for a single delivery, $25 for what appeared to be just a burger and fries. The drop-off location was 15 minutes away, far beyond my usual delivery radius. Something about it felt off, but the promise of good money clouded my judgment. The rain intensified as I drove further from the city center. Street lights became scarcer, replaced by towering pine trees that loomed over the narrow road. My GPS guided me onto a gravel path that wasn't even marked on the regular map. The crunch of stones under my tires echoed through the darkness, competing with the rhythmic swish of my windshield wipers. The house turned out to be little more than a weathered cabin, barely visible through the curtain of rain. No lights were on except for a single motion-activated bulb above what I assumed was the front door. The nearest neighbor had to be at least half a mile away. I checked my phone again. The address matched. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a path through overgrown grass. As I killed the engine, the silence felt overwhelming. The rain drumming on my car roof was the only sound for miles. That's when I noticed something odd. Fresh footprints in the mud led not to the front door, but around the side of the cabin. They were clearly recent. The rain hadn't had time to fill them in yet. I grabbed the paper bag with the food and stepped out into the downpour. Each step toward the cabin felt heavier than the last. The motion light flickered as I approached. That's when I realized it wasn't actually connected to any power source. It was one of those cheap solar-powered lights, which meant nobody had been maintaining the power here for a while. I knocked on the door, more out of obligation than expectation. The hollow sound echoed through what I could only assume was an empty house. After 30 seconds of nothing but rain, I knocked again. Still nothing. Just as I was about to give up and head back to my car, I heard movement. Not from inside the house, but from somewhere behind me. I turned around to see a figure standing at the edge of my car's headlight beam. They were completely still, just watching me. "Hello," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have your delivery." The figure started moving toward me. That's when I noticed they weren't walking normally. There was something predatory about their movements. I dropped the bag and sprinted back to my car. Behind me, I could hear rapid footsteps splashing through puddles. I practically dove into my driver's seat, yanking the door shut just as a hand slammed against my window. The man outside, because I could now clearly see it was a man, had a face contorted with rage. He was wearing dark clothes, completely soaked through, and his eyes. There was something wrong with his eyes. He started pounding on the window with both fists. I fumbled with my keys, finally getting the engine started. The man suddenly stopped hitting the window and looked behind my car. That's when my headlights caught movement at the edge of the trees, more figures emerging from the darkness. I slammed the gas pedal, wheels spinning in the mud before finally catching grip. The man jumped back as I accelerated past him. But in my rearview mirror, I could see all of them running toward a vehicle that had been hidden just off the gravel path. I called the police as soon as I had cell service again. They found the cabin empty, but there were signs someone had been squatting there recently. They also found evidence that similar delivery orders had been placed to that address over the past few weeks, but no other drivers had reported anything. I guess I was either the first one they tried to grab, or the first one who managed to get away. I quit delivery driving that night. The extra money wasn't worth finding out what those men had planned for anyone who actually got caught. Working night shifts at a warehouse complex on the outskirts of Seattle wasn't exactly my dream job, but it paid decent money. My position as a security supervisor meant I could usually stay inside during the heavy winter rains that were typical for the Pacific Northwest. That particular night in late January, the rain was coming down in sheets, drumming against the metal roof of the building. By 9 o'clock, I'd already locked up after the last employee left, settling in for what I expected to be another quiet 12-hour shift. Instead of making my usual outdoor rounds, I positioned myself near the glass entrance doors, occasionally glancing up from my phone to scan the parking lot. The security lights cast an eerie yellow glow through the rain, creating shifting shadows as the wind whipped through the nearby trees. Around midnight, a deep metallic groan echoed through the warehouse, The sound made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was like someone had forced open one of the heavy loading dock doors. In my 3 years working here, I'd never heard anything quite like it. Protocol said I should investigate, but something felt wrong. The warehouse was massive, with one main hallway that branched off into 6 separate storage areas. Each area was filled with rows of tall shelving units that disappeared into the darkness beyond the reach of the emergency lights. I walked down the main corridor, checking each section as I passed. The first 4 were exactly as they should be, silent and secure. But when I reached the 5th door, my heart nearly stopped. It was cracked open, just enough to let a sliver of darkness spill into the hallway. "Hello," my voice echoed through the empty space. "This is security. Anyone there?" A response came that made my blood run cold, a soft, almost childlike giggle from somewhere in the darkness. Then a man's voice, barely above a whisper, "Come here." I took a step back. "What are you doing here? This is private property." "Come here," the voice repeated, slightly louder, but still maintaining that unsettling softness. "Just want to talk." Every instinct screamed at me to run. I backed away from the door, fumbling for my radio. "This is Harrison, requesting immediate police assistance." At the door creaked wider, and I caught a glimpse of movement in the darkness. Without waiting to see more, I turned and sprinted for the exit. I could hear footsteps behind me, but I didn't look back until I was outside in the rain. The police arrived within 5 minutes. Security footage later revealed a man in his 50s, wearing a dark jacket, had somehow slipped in through a gap in one of the loading dock doors. The cameras caught him carrying what appeared to be a hunting knife, methodically making his way through the warehouse until he found a hiding spot in that 5th storage section. We never found out why he broke in or what he planned to do. The way he spoke, how he tried to lure me deeper into the darkness. I think about that sometimes, especially on rainy nights when I'm alone in the building. I transferred to day shift after that. The pay isn't as good, but at least I can see what's lurking in the shadows. I never wanted to work on Halloween night, but being the newest employee at Quick-Mart meant I didn't have much choice. My friends were throwing an epic costume party that evening, and all I could do was watch their social media updates from behind the counter of our small convenience store. The night started quietly enough. Most people were either at parties or taking their kids trick-or-treating, leaving the streets practically empty. Every 15 minutes or so, I'd see a police cruiser making its rounds, but otherwise, it was just me and my phone. Around 11, I decided to make myself useful and started restocking the shelves. The quiet was getting to me, so I focused on the mundane task of arranging energy drinks and candy bars. That's when I heard the electronic chime of the front door. 3 men walked in, and immediately my stomach tightened. They were wearing Halloween masks, but these weren't the cheap plastic ones you'd find at a party store. These were high-quality, horror movie-style masks. One was a twisted version of a wolf, another looked like a demon, and the third wore what appeared to be a plague doctor mask with a long, curved beak. Despite the masks, I could tell these weren't teenagers out for Halloween fun. They were built like adults, and one had visible tattoos creeping up his neck above his leather jacket. I managed a weak welcome to Quick-Mart, but they ignored me, spreading out through the aisles. After a few minutes of browsing, the one in the wolf mask approached the counter with a single pack of bubble gum. Something about the way he moved made my skin crawl. I rang up the gum, trying to keep my hands steady. "That'll be $1.50, I said, proud that my voice didn't shake. None of them responded. Instead, the one in the plague doctor mask walked to the front door and slowly slid the deadbolt into place. Before I could react, the third man, the one in the demon mask, vaulted over the counter and grabbed me. I tried to break free, but he was incredibly strong. "Just take the money," I gasped. "I won't stop you." But the man in the wolf mask just shook his head slowly. They weren't interested in the register. The demon-masked man started dragging me toward the back of the store, and I realized with horror that they had something much worse planned. Just then, blue and red lights flooded the store. The plague doctor cursed and yanked the bolt back open as sirens filled the air. All three men released me and bolted out the door, disappearing into the darkness. The police later told me they'd been tracking these men all night. Earlier, they'd been spotted trying to lure children away from trick-or-treating groups with candy. The officers had been circling the area because they suspected the men might target a store or gas station next. We reviewed the security footage, but the masks made identification impossible. However, the way they moved, how they ignored the money. It was clear they'd done this before. The police found zip ties and duct tape in a bag one of them dropped while fleeing. Sometimes I think about how lucky I was that the police patrol happened to drive by at that exact moment. But mostly, I think about all the previous Halloween nights when these men might have succeeded in whatever they had planned. I never worked another Halloween shift after that, and to this day, the sight of costume masks makes my blood run cold. The tech startup I worked at as a night guard was housed in an old Victorian building that had been converted into modern offices. To be honest, I wasn't even sure what kind of software they developed. My job was simply to monitor the place from 8 at night until 4 in the morning. The building's layout was simple but strange, with high ceilings and long corridors that still held traces of its 19th century origins. Despite its size, we only had outdoor cameras, ancient things that produced grainy, black and white footage on the monitors in my small security office. On this particular October night, the autumn wind was rattling the original window frames, creating an unsettling symphony of creaks and whistles. Around 1 in the morning, I heard something that didn't fit with the building's usual nocturnal sounds, a distinct click, like a door latch engaging. I sat up straighter in my chair, listening intently. The sound wasn't uncommon during the day with employees coming and going, but at this hour, it was definitely out of place. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the hallway. The corridor stretched out before me, 3 doors on each side leading to various office spaces. Everything looked exactly as it had during my earlier rounds. All doors closed, emergency lights casting a soft blue glow along the baseboards. I checked each room methodically. The first 2 were filled with rows of empty desks, exactly as they should be. The third room was the conference room, its glass walls offering a clear view of the vacant space within. Everything seemed normal, but something kept nagging at the back of my mind. When I returned to my security office, I decided to leave the door open, just in case. 20 minutes passed, and I had almost convinced myself that the sound had been my imagination. Then I heard footsteps, soft and deliberate, echoing from somewhere down the hall. I stepped out again, my heart pounding. Hello, is someone there? The footsteps stopped abruptly. Then a door slowly creaked open at the far end of the corridor. I swept my flashlight beam toward the sound, but the door was already closing again. The security system hadn't registered any breaches. All exterior doors were still locked and armed. Whoever was here either had access to the building or had found another way in. Neither option was comforting. I crept down the hallway, my shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. When I reached the last door, I noticed something that made my blood run cold, a shadow moving under the door, like someone was standing just on the other side. Before I could react, I heard movement behind me in the direction of my security office. It was then I realized I might not be dealing with just one intruder. I backed away from the door and pulled out my phone, quickly dialing the police. The shadows under the door suddenly surged forward as the door flew open. A man in dark clothing emerged, his face hidden by the darkness. I turned and ran, not waiting to see if there were others. The police arrived within minutes. The security footage showed 3 individuals who had somehow accessed the building through a maintenance entrance that wasn't connected to the main alarm system. One of them had been hiding in the ventilation system above my office while I was doing my rounds. They found specialized hacking equipment left behind in one of the offices. Apparently, the startup had been developing some kind of encrypted communication software, and these people were after it. The company installed internal cameras and upgraded the entire security system after that night. I still work there, but now I carry a panic button, and the ventilation system has been fitted with motion sensors. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind rattles those old windows, I find myself staring up at the vents, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't heard that first door click. I'd been working at Mountain View Pub for about 6 months, mainly handling their late-night pizza deliveries. It was an odd setup, a full-service bar that also delivered pizzas until 4 in the morning. But in a college town like Boulder, Colorado, it somehow worked. That night, the pub was packed with the usual weekend crowd. Between deliveries, I helped clear tables and wash dishes. Around 3 in the morning, when things were finally slowing down, another delivery order came in. The address was about 20 minutes outside town, which was unusual but not unheard of. I loaded the pizza into my old Subaru and headed out, watching as the city lights faded behind me. The roads got darker and narrower as I climbed into the foothills, my headlights cutting through the crisp mountain air. My GPS suddenly announced, "You have arrived in the middle of nowhere." I pulled over, confused. Instead of a house, I was facing the entrance to a state park. The iron gates were closed, with a "No entry after sunset" sign clearly visible. I double-checked the address. It matched exactly. Something wasn't right. I called the customer's number, and they picked up almost immediately. Before I could explain the situation, a man's voice spoke. "Look to your left." A chill ran down my spine. Through the trees, I caught movement. Someone was waving. They were standing about 30 feet into the darkness, barely visible in the ambient moonlight. My instincts screamed that this was wrong, but I had to decide quickly. "Sir, I can't enter the park. If you'd like your pizza, you'll need to come to the road." There was a pause, then the same voice, lower this time. "I know your car won't start." My heart stopped. I turned the key, nothing. Just a clicking sound. How did he know? Had they done something to my car while I was driving here? The figure started moving toward me, maintaining a steady, deliberate pace. In my rearview mirror, I saw another shape emerge from the trees on the other side of the road. Then a third. I frantically tried the engine again while dialing 911. Just as the operator answered, the closest man reached my window. He wasn't wearing a coat despite the cold, and his eyes, they were completely expressionless, like he was wearing a mask of human skin. He pulled something from his pocket. The gleam of metal caught my eye. The other two men were closing in fast, one on each side of my car. In desperation, I tried the engine one last time. The starter caught with a roar. I slammed the gearshift into drive and floored it, the tires spraying gravel. The man by my window stumbled back, dropping whatever he'd been holding. In my mirrors, I saw all three running back into the trees, moving with an unnatural speed. I didn't slow down until I reached the main highway. When the police investigated, they found a crude device attached to my engine, something designed to temporarily disable the starter. They also found multiple sets of footprints around where I'd parked, suggesting the men had been waiting there long before I arrived. The order had been placed with a burner phone, and the payment was made with a stolen credit card. But here's the really disturbing part. Over the next few weeks, 3 other delivery drivers in the area reported similar experiences. None of them were as lucky as I was. 2 weeks later, the police caught the group trying the same thing with a food delivery service. They were running some kind of operation targeting delivery drivers, though they never revealed their full plans. I quit that job the day after my encounter. These days, I won't even order delivery for myself. The memory of those empty eyes staring through my window is something I'll never forget. During my gap year, I made money through various house-sitting gigs across New England. It was perfect. I got to travel, stay in nice places, and get paid for it. Most jobs involved watching pets and keeping the house occupied while owners were away on vacation. This particular assignment was in coastal Maine, a stunning lake house nestled among towering pines. The owners, the Andersons, needed someone to look after their golden retriever, Ruby, for a week while they visited family in Florida. The house was gorgeous, all wood and glass, with a wraparound deck overlooking the water. After meeting Ruby, who was the sweetest dog imaginable, and getting a tour of the house, the Andersons left for their trip. I spent the first afternoon exploring the property and playing with Ruby in the massive yard. It was early October, and the fall colors reflected beautifully on the lake's surface. Around 7 that evening, I took Ruby for her walk. The private road leading to the house wound through dense forest for about a mile before connecting to the main road. The setting sun filtered through the trees, creating long shadows across our path. As we headed back toward the house, I noticed someone walking down the driveway. He was tall and thin, wearing what looked like work clothes, jeans, and a flannel shirt. When he passed us, he kept his head down and didn't say a word, which struck me as odd given how friendly everyone had been in this area. What really bothered me was that this was a private road that only led to the lake house. There were no other properties connected to it, so where had he come from? And where was he going? I hurried Ruby back to the house, making sure all the doors were locked once we were inside. The rest of the evening passed quietly. I made dinner and settled in to watch a movie, with Ruby curled up beside me on the couch. Around 11, she suddenly lifted her head and started barking. Not her usual excited bark, but something more urgent and fearful. Before I could even get up to check what had startled her, I heard footsteps on the deck outside. Ruby raced down the hallway, barking frantically at one of the guest rooms. When I followed her, I found one of the doors slightly ajar. My heart pounding, I called Ruby's name, but she continued barking, her eyes fixed on the room's walk-in closet. The house was silent except for her barks and the soft creaking of the wooden floor under my feet. I slowly approached the closet door, trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. When I opened it, the beam from my phone's flashlight illuminated a horrifying sight. A pair of eyes staring back at me through a gap in the hanging clothes. I slammed the closet door shut and ran with Ruby straight to my car. With shaking hands, I called 911. During the agonizing wait for the police, I sat in the locked car watching the house. Through the large windows, I could see a figure moving inside, and then two more appeared on the deck. When the police arrived, the intruders were already gone. But what they found inside was chilling. The men had been living in the crawl space under the house, probably long before I arrived. They had a collection of items stolen from various lake houses in the area. Most disturbing of all, their hiding spot was directly beneath the master bedroom, where I would have slept that night. The police told me these men had been watching the house, knew the owners were leaving, and had likely planned this for weeks. If it hadn't been for Ruby's protective instincts, I might never have known they were there until it was too late. The Andersons installed an extensive security system after that, but I couldn't shake the image of those eyes staring at me from the darkness. I still house sit occasionally, but never in secluded locations. And I'm forever grateful for Ruby, whose instincts probably saved my life that night. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd gone to bed without discovering them. A thought that still keeps me awake on quiet nights. Living in downtown Denver has its challenges, but the constant stream of delivery work helps pay the bills. I've been cycling for both Grubhub and DoorDash for about 6 months, and I know the city's streets like the back of my hand. The urban crime rate is no joke. There's always something in the news, but I'd never experienced anything firsthand. That changed on a dreary Thursday evening in November. A light snow was falling, making the streets slick and keeping most other cyclists at home. I'd been making deliveries since 4, and around 11, I found myself far from my usual downtown territory. The order came from a Mexican restaurant I'd never heard of, way out in the older industrial district, where warehouses were slowly being converted into trendy lofts. The payout was exceptional $40 for what looked like a simple burrito order. I should have known something was off. As I secured the delivery bag to my bike rack, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Its headlights were on, but I couldn't see anyone inside through the tinted windows. Just another parked car, I thought, though something about it made me uneasy. I pedaled through the nearly empty streets, the wet snow dampening the usual city sounds. After a few turns, I realized the SUV was following me, maintaining a consistent distance. My heart rate picked up, but I told myself it was just paranoia. The delivery address led me to a massive brick apartment complex. It looked half renovated, with some windows modern and bright, others dark and boarded up. As I chained my bike to a rack, the SUV pulled into the parking lot. My hands were shaking, not from the cold. I grabbed the order and hurried inside. The lobby was dimly lit, with peeling paint and missing ceiling tiles. The elevator was out of order, so I took the stairs to the second floor. The hallway was eerily quiet, no TV sounds, no voices, nothing you'd expect from an occupied building. As I approached the apartment number, I heard footsteps on the stairs behind me. Two men appeared at the end of the hallway, walking toward me with deliberate steps. They made no attempt to hide their faces, which somehow made it worse. They didn't care if I could identify them. I knocked on the apartment door, praying someone would answer. The footsteps got closer. When I tried to walk past the men, they blocked the entire hallway, backing me up against the door. That's when it swung open. A third man grabbed me and pulled me inside. They locked the door while I screamed, but in that empty building, who would hear? Just as they were dragging me toward a back room, there was a loud crash from the hallway. "Police! Open up!" The men froze. One cursed under his breath. Within seconds, the door burst open and several officers rushed in, weapons drawn. The men didn't resist. It was like they'd been through this before. It turned out I wasn't the first delivery person they'd tried this with. 10 minutes before I arrived, they'd attempted the same thing with another driver, who managed to escape and call the police. The officers had been monitoring the building, waiting to see if the men would try again. In the other room, they found another victim, a delivery driver who'd arrived just before me. The whole operation was calculated. They'd place large orders to lure drivers to the building, follow them to ensure they were alone, and then, well, the police never revealed their full intentions, but the evidence they found spoke volumes. I still deliver, but only in busy areas and never after dark. Sometimes when I'm riding through downtown, I'll catch a glimpse of a black SUV in my peripheral vision, and my heart will skip a beat. But mostly, I think about how lucky I was, how a single phone call from a stranger probably saved both our lives that night. Working from home as a night shift technical support agent for New Tech Solutions had its perks. No commute, comfortable clothes, and the ability to watch Netflix between customer chats. The downside, those long, quiet hours between 2 and 5 in the morning, when the world feels uncomfortably still. My home office was in the spare bedroom upstairs, overlooking our backyard and the dense forest beyond. It was a typical February night in northern Michigan, snow piled high against the fence, branches heavy with ice. I was handling a routine password, reset when I first heard it. A voice carried on the winter wind, calling for help. The sound was so unexpected in the dead of night that I initially thought I'd imagined it. But there it was again, a man's voice, seemingly coming from my backyard. I was in the middle of a chat with a customer, so I couldn't immediately investigate. The voice continued, becoming more frequent but never more urgent. There was something off about the tone. It was too measured, too consistent for someone genuinely in distress. After finishing with the customer, I moved to the window. Through the glow of the security light, I could make out a figure standing in the middle of my snow-covered yard. He was wearing a dark winter coat and what looked like a knit cap, just standing there, periodically calling for help without moving a muscle. It didn't make sense. If he really needed help, why didn't he come to the front door? Why stand motionless in 2 feet of snow? And how did he get into my fenced backyard in the first place? I stepped away from the window, and immediately the calls stopped. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the voice had been. When I returned to my desk to call the police, I heard heavy banging on my back door. The hollow plastic sound echoed through the house. I crept downstairs and looked down the hallway. Through the glass panel in the door, I could see him face pressed against the window, staring directly at me. He started pounding on the door again, his expression completely blank. I ran back upstairs and dialed 911. When I looked out the window again, the man had stepped back from the door. In the security light's harsh glow, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Multiple sets of footprints in the snow, leading to different positions around my house. He wasn't alone. Through the gaps in the fence panels, I could see shadows moving, at least 3 other figures circling my house. The original man remained by the back door, occasionally testing the handle. The police arrived within minutes, their silent approach catching the men off guard. 2 were arrested immediately, while the others fled into the woods. The officers found tools for breaking and entering, zip ties, and duct tape in their possession. The investigation revealed this wasn't their first attempt. They'd been targeting remote workers in the area, using the someone in distress technique to gain access to homes. Their previous attempts had focused on people they'd identified as living alone. They had been watching me, learning my routine. They knew I worked nights because they'd seen my office light on. They knew my husband was away on business. They had probably been planning this for weeks. I still work nights, but we've since installed cameras, motion sensors, and better security lights. The back door's flimsy lock has been replaced with a heavy-duty deadbolt. But sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, I'll hear the wind moving through the trees and mistake it for a voice calling for help. I've learned that real people in distress don't stand motionless in your backyard at 3 in the morning. They don't call for help in the same tone over and over. And they certainly don't wait for you to investigate before trying to break in. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.